Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kenneth Szallai. I'm president of Lake Express, and I want to extend my sincere thanks to BizStarts, to Dan Steiniger, the board of BizStarts, and for all of you for recognizing David and myself with the Inspirational Entrepreneur Award. It's both gratifying and humbling, and of course, it is most appreciated. In the run-up for this breakfast, Dan said that the award comes with a price, and the price was to recount to you as entrepreneurs, not the touchy-feely side of a successful business adventure, but the less publicly talked about side of things that entrepreneurs face, the setbacks, the frustrations, the unforeseens, and the improbables that seem to morph into realities. Dan's directions were don't hold back. My lovely wife's directions were be tactful. Somewhat contradictory, but then again, they both know me pretty well. As a project, Lake Express had many, many unique aspects, almost all of which led to very unusual challenges. First, the initial development was performed by a government entity, the Port of Milwaukee, of which I was director. That's kind of tough in the credibility sector when the government comes and says, hey, I have a project for you. Secondly, it was a shipping project, not exactly in the mainstream of investment opportunities when compared to, say, Microsoft or Google, a high-tech venture, or for that matter, oil wells in Texas, or a manufacturing operation in Tennessee. It's difficult for financiers to gain enough confidence to invest in something that's pretty arcane by its nature, and in an industry, shipping, that's rarely, if ever, in the news, let alone in the investment markets. And what shipping PR there has admittedly been spectacular. Think the Titanic, or perhaps more recently, Somali pirates. How can investors evaluate a project like this, especially when you're asking them to spend $25 million on a startup company that has no track record in order to build a ship that's never been built in the United States, a ship for which no design existed, to be built in a shipyard that hadn't yet built a significant ship, which was okay because they had no trained workers, only to be certified by the United States Coast Guard under rules not yet written so that it could operate on a route that hadn't seen a ferry operation in 40 years, to be sailed by mariners who had no experience in operating this type of ship, and for which no training existed in the United States. You can understand then that there were some hurdles to overcome and that things didn't always go well. Having said that, I guess at least we could feel pretty confident that no one else would be bringing a similar idea to the markets. Ultimately, it took 15 years from the initial inception of the project at my kitchen table until the ship arrived in Milwaukee, ready for service. And that brings to mind the first thing that they never tell entrepreneurs, and that is it always takes longer, and usually much longer, to bring an idea to fruition than you think it will. So it pays to be patient. Patience, indeed, is a necessity, but only up to a point. You need to be realistic in determining whether you have a great project that just needs time or a project that won't fly no matter how much time you give it. In fact, the Lake Express project took many thousands of hours to develop, even before the search for investment money began. But we knew this was a doable project and that it would be a valuable asset to the port, to Milwaukee, and to Wisconsin. We didn't think much about Michigan back in those days. The second thing they never tell an entrepreneur is that if you go it alone, you get 100% of the credit for a failed idea. You then own 100% of zero, and if you really want to, you can do a self-autopsy all by yourself. So it pays to have and to develop friends and supporters. That way, you will have someone to complain to when things aren't going right. You'll have someone to give you advice, even when you don't want to hear it. But ultimately, you'll greatly increase your chances of having a successful project because, hopefully, you're bringing people to the table who are smarter than you. The conventional wisdom is that entrepreneurs are rugged individualists, taking on all comers, forcing their vision on the world single-handedly. While that might be great PR, it's not reality. Bringing an idea to a successful conclusion takes, in my opinion, a broad coalition of supporters and contributors, a group that varies significantly over time and by task, and therefore requires not only rugged individualism, but leadership and diplomatic skill. Think Eisenhower before D-Day as opposed to Lindbergh, the lone eagle, flying the Atlantic. It is paramount to develop good partners. The search for the correct venture partner does not always go so well. As a public entity, the Port of Milwaukee, which did the initial development work on the ferry concept, did have authority under state law to own and operate its own ship. But we had always believed that this should be a private sector initiative. And government is not good at starting and running new business. They simply can't respond with alacrity to market situations, and this project would require an awful lot of nimbleness, particularly in the startup years. While we did engage in conversation with several development groups, we never had the confidence that they had the chemistry to get it done. These discussions were sometimes long and tedious and led us down several dead-end streets. They were time-consuming, but we learned. I was fortunate. BizStarts' own Dan Steininger was president of the Harbor Commission while I was director of the port. And trust me, he's a very forgiving guy. He was and is a friend and a serious mentor. Dan made a phone call on my behalf to Sheldon and David Lubar, and Dan was confident that if a deal could be done, this was the organization that could do it. The rest, as they say, is history. These were very, very different people to those who I had been meeting with. I knew at the end of the second meeting that we would get a ship in the water, somehow. Not everything was even close to being worked out, but the key part of the puzzle was in place, and that is the right partner. It was a serious battle on many fronts to bring Lake Express to fruition, and many times David and company would have been justified in backing off. They never did. Ultimately, they took 4 years of their time and resources to get this deal done, and I admire them for their foresight and their courage. It would be very easy to have said, enough. They never did. It would have been easy to get discouraged. If they did, they never showed it. And they continue to show the same fortitude and commitment today. I feel most fortunate to have David Lubar alongside of me. There's a reason we're both on the dais here today. I could not have asked for nor found a better partner in developing and operating this project. And as Dan said, you do have to be a little nuts. When you do a project, not everyone is going to like you or the project. That's the third thing they never tell entrepreneurs. You can't please all the people all of the time, as they say. If you are or can be perceived as a threat to a competitor or other interest, be it business, political, personal, or whatever, it can get very ugly very fast. So it was with Lake Express. This is a project that was seriously going to change the status quo. And while overwhelmingly embraced by the cities involved and by the consumers in general, not everybody out there was happy. Some folks wanted to kill the project, some folks still do, and spent an enormous amount of time and money to do so. The critics failed. But it was a brutal 2 years of fending off attacks at many levels and from many sectors. This is where personal integrity comes into play and why it pays to be reputable. Develop and guard a good reputation by consistently doing what is right and honorable. I could rely on the fact that I was well established in the maritime community and everyone involved knew me, how I conducted business, and the reputation that I enjoyed. My partners were above reproach. There's that partner thing again. Choose carefully. And it pays to document and keep your supporters informed as you go along. That had been done extensively with the Lake Express project. There had been no secrets, no backdoor deals, no cutting corners. There still isn't, and there won't be. The corollary to it always takes longer than you think is you never have enough time to do what you need to do. That's the fourth thing they never tell entrepreneurs. Once the financing was in place, as David spoke about, after our lengthy and contentious fight to get the MARAD backing, we had but 11 months to finish designing the ship, acquire the engines and construction materials, configure the shipyard so it could build the ship, hire and train the yard workers, and get the ship built. The original cycle to do this was 18 months. Now remember, we're going to build a ship at a shipyard that had never built a ship like this in the United States. Additionally, we needed to build 2 terminals in 2 different states, establish all of the business infrastructure to run the company, such as reservation systems, call centers, engineering support, accounting, et cetera, and ultimately hire and train about 100 people who would deliver the service to the customers and operate the ship in 11 months. It can't be done, but it was. In all that 11 months, everybody involved simply rolled up their sleeves and went to work. There was no sense of territory. It was simply, who is best suited to make this or that decision or to do the work that needed to be done? And work we all did. One of the proudest moments of my life was going to Mobile, Alabama, for the launch of the ship. The ship had been built indoors in a giant construction shed on a railway slip. It was a beautiful late spring evening. The ship was set to launch at dawn the next morning. The Lake Express engineering rep and I came back to the shipyard from a very late dinner after a very long day. The giant shed doors were open, highlighting and framing the ship. The shed lights on, contrasting the ship with the dark, beautiful Alabama night sky. The engineer went to his office for a moment, and I was there alone with this massive ship sitting dry in the construction shed. 6 stories from the keel to the topmost part of the ship, gleaming with new paint, silent, beautiful. I was proud to know we had accomplished what no one had done in this country before. the construction of a high-speed auto passenger ferry. Despite all of the odds, all of the opposition, all of the impossibilities. And I knew for that one moment, and for that one moment only, that ship was mine and only mine. That's why we do what we do. For that one moment, most people will never know. I walked around to the stern of the ship, and there was one lone painter finishing off painting the home port name on the stern, Milwaukee. Except he spelled it wrong. And that, my friends, is the fifth thing they never tell an entrepreneur. The only easy day was yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Kenneth Szallai. Thank you, and have a great morning.